What is BRICS, and how does it compare to other global groups such as NATO, the EU, and ASEAN?
You can think of BRICS as a group of countries, not so much an alliance or a trade union or an economic union like the ASEAN or EU or NATO might be. BRICS is simply a collection of emerging global economies from the global south who think that their economic clout and the size of their economies is growing to the extent that they can be a power broker or a player on the global scene. And this is an attempt by these countries to try and come together and rethink or push back on the rules of the road as far as the global system is concerned. It was initially started by Brazil, India, China, and Russia. And then later on, South Africa was added. So the S is for the South Africa. In just this year, they have added 6 more members, 3 countries from the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Iran, 1 country from Latin America, Argentina, and then 2 countries from Africa, Egypt, and Ethiopia. And so with this addition, people are now starting to call this BRICS Plus, and it is to be seen how the addition of these new members will change the scope of their engagements. I should also add that China is definitely one of the leading powers behind BRICS, but it is not the sole motivator of all activities that BRICS undertakes. We did notice that unlike the G20 summit that was recently had in India, where President Xi did not go in person, instead chose to send his premier, at the BRICS summit, he has always shown up and tried to show China's leadership. And we have learned that the addition of these new members and the idea of expanding BRICS to BRICS Plus was actually that of China. And the Chinese will see this as a major win, as the total size of the GDP from these 11 BRICS Plus members is now pretty sizable.
How will BRICS coordination and cooperation impact the US?
I think in the short term, we do not see much substantive effect on an average American's life or even the American economy. I think this is at the moment more signaling than it is substance. The BRICS did, for example, have at one point this idea of coming up with a singular currency. And there were also conversations around coming up with their own payment system so that there is less reliance on the US dollar and the SWIFT payment system, so that these countries can avoid future US sanctions, which, of course, is one of the big tools of power that the US still holds. Having said that, both of those initiatives have actually failed. These countries still have a lot of differences among themselves. And it looks to me from recent developments that most of the focus on BRICS will be on economic integration, trade, and trying to work together more and more on economic cooperation amongst themselves rather than trying to assert themselves at the global stage. The BRICS had also at one point started the BRICS Bank, which is supposed to be like the World Bank, a multilateral bank. And that has also had problems in taking off. It has been in operations now for a few years. Its loan size or its portfolio is growing, but it is still nowhere near some of its big competitors in Washington or even in other capitals like the World Bank or Asian Development Bank in Manila.
How will this expansion of BRICS impact China's relationship with the global south?
After completing 10 years of the BRI, China has recently launched a series of global initiatives without much specifics on budgets and initiative details. They've done this for a global security initiative, for a global cultural and civilization initiative, and a global development initiative. All of these are intended to essentially question the rules-based world order, which the US and its allies had created and have maintained over the last several decades. I think the expansion of BRICS into these new countries, especially the inclusion of countries from Africa and Latin America, is basically going to signal to the world and to countries in the global south that China is in the process now with practical steps to rebuild the rules of the road as it comes to the global system, and that all the grievances that developing countries have had from institutions like the IMF or the World Bank, which they often blame for many of their ills, that narrative is going to be supported by a big global power now showing up and saying, we are trying to build an alternative system, come in our ambit and we will walk you through that and see what the world looks like. But having said that, I think, again, in the short term, the bulk of China's substantive engagements with the global south will still be through the Belt and Road Initiative and other initiatives which involve actual dollars and funds and construction capacity. Most of these initiatives, including the BRICS, I think at the moment are more talk than they are action.
Can you share a little bit about how China's engagement with BRICS has changed over the past 14 years?
That's a great point. The concept of BRICS, or this acronym, was actually coined by economists in the West, in New York, who were looking at the world as analysts of the future of the economy. And they picked these countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, as the emerging powers of the world. And their assertion essentially was that by 2050, these countries will be the leading economies, and we will be working a lot with them on different kinds of economic investments and initiatives and so on. So that's essentially where the concept started. And in the early days, BRICS was more like an investment club where these countries were coming together, sharing best practices and presenting their best foot forward as a group to Western capital and saying that we are attractive destinations for investments. All of that changed by around 2009, 2010. This is around the time when China, after the global financial crisis, was pulling its dollars from US treasuries and moving them to developing countries through the Belt and Road Initiative. Even if the BRI was not formally announced at that time, we saw the biggest increases in China's outward development financing in the years 2009, 10, and 11. This is also the time when South Africa was included in this club. And so that's when it really became a block of countries or a group of countries. And then in 2014, they decided to make it even more formal by introducing the idea of a new development bank. And since then, every year we are seeing new initiatives. And I think the 2023 summit that we just saw in September of this year will be the coming of a new era in the evolution of BRICS, because it has certainly gone from being a group of these 5 emerging economies into something much larger with bigger ambitions. And all you have to do is read the transcript of the speech that President Xi of China made and on this summit, and it is very clear that they are looking at this as a tool to compete against the United States and to put a face against what they consider as hegemony of the United States on the global system.